All right, guys. So the genesis of Digital Wildcatters was the Oil and Gas Startups podcast. So it's only right that today we do a quick podcast with a technology that's focused on oil and gas. So today we have my friend Anton Albrin, Division Vice President, Chief Revenue Officer at SkyBitz. What's going on, Anton? How you doing, man?
Hey, good. Thanks so much. Hello, everybody.
You're in Dallas, right?
Thanks for having me on the show. What's that?
Said you're in Dallas, right?
I am, yes. Good old Dallas, man. So
awesome.
Warm weather.
Yeah, it's we came here to Chattanooga for Evolve, and it's definitely a lot cooler weather. It's about, I don't know, 70 degrees outside, so I'm not really in a hurry to get back to Houston, but we'll be back there tonight. So, hey, man, tell me a little bit about what SkyBitz is and what you guys are doing at a high level, and then we can kind of dive into the details from there.
That's great. Hey, thank you. And thanks for having me. Great job on the show and Digital Wildcatters, what you're doing. So really cool stuff. We're excited to be a part of it. So high level, SkyBitz, we do industrial IoT solutions. So heavily involved in trucking, transportation, oil and gas industries, petrochemical delivery operations. And really what, if you think about kind of just to put an analogy in place, if you think about like your home alarm system, you can set it remotely. There's ways to track even, your thermostat. You can check your refrigerator now. You can set, doors, windows, video, whatever you want. That's synonymous with what we do. We just do it in industrial environments. So whether it's trailers or flatbed beds or equipment out, in the field, if you want to know whether it's empty or loaded, for that vertical, you can remotely monitor that with a device, and then basically tells you, where things are, what's happening. Is it empty? Is it loaded? Is the door open? So very similar. Oil and gas on the tank monitoring side of the business that we run, which is a lot of remote tank monitoring management. We have inventory management that happens. So it lets tank, fills and be able to determine the amount of gallons that are in tanks at any given time, across your network. So that's in a nutshell what we do.
Yeah, and it's something, I used to have some little stripper wells up in Oklahoma, and, it was an 8-hour, 9-hour drive from me. I was like, I should be able to monitor all of this stuff from my phone, right? Instead of, I got a old pumper out there that's continuously checking gauges on tanks day in and day out. So are you guys focused, when you talk about the oil and gas industry, there's tanks all the way across, upstream, midstream, downstream. I know you guys are heavily involved in trucking and transportation. So where do you guys really fit into the mix of the oil and gas industry?
Great question. And, I mentioned that only because there is some crossover. When you look at the big guys like Schlumberger and Baker Hughes and Halliburton, they've got equipment that they've got pretty much the whole gamut. So we do see a little crossover, but the majority is the tank monitoring component. And, we talked a little bit, at one point about where we play upstream and midstream. And really there's kind of continuous monitoring heavily in those applications where you've got PLC SCADA systems, and those are your primary systems. But we do quite a bit in some of the backup ancillary services, but also in the methanol space to support a lot of the natural gas flow. So ensuring that the flow is happening and there's no outages or issues in those segments. So companies like DCP Midstream would be an example there. But I would say the lion's share of our business is really downstream, focusing on lubes, fuels, chemical distribution that's going to go to a variety of commercial, retail, even sort of business related operations to support those demand-based models.
Yeah, so I'm really I come from upstream, right, and predominantly focus on upstream just because it's what I come from and it's what I can talk to. Why don't you school me up a little bit on some of the applications in the downstream, like when you start talking about lubricants and chemicals, and you're talking somewhere way long down the road from the wellhead where I'm used to being, right? So why don't you school me up a little bit on, and a lot of people here in our audience, you've got a lot of reservoir engineers, geologists, landmen that are very upstream centric as well. And those downstream applications, are these, can you just school me up a little bit more specifically on what those applications are, and I can dive in a little bit deeper?
Absolutely. And, it could be anything from and maybe I'll start with just the general solution, how it works. We've got really 4 components to it. It all starts with a tank monitor. That's a collection device that goes into the tank. You've got all types of sensors that have to be chemically matched and compatible with the solution. So depending on what that is, and then you've got an uplink that transmits that data, so bits and bytes across a network, AT&T, Verizon. We even have satellite, and that goes into our software, cloud-based software, and then you're able to then calculate information and then disseminate that into their other operating systems or into a web portal where dispatchers or operations resources can have full visibility of their tank level inventory and make decisions based on fill levels and determining how to route drivers and trucks and equipment and do it least cost routing. What that creates is ultimately delivery efficiency. And some of the industry metrics right now are around 30 to 40% in inefficient deliveries happening right now, which means you're out of every 10 tanks, maybe 3 or 4 you didn't need to go to, and you're basically in a milk run hitting things that you don't need to, and then so you're able to kind of close that loop up, and then also provide that visibility to your operations, your partners, your third parties, your suppliers. So everybody's in this network now of information, and then of course you can layer in the higher value added activities with dispatch, full on dispatch operations, and then even ERP applications. But essentially, think of Jiffy Lubes, car wash stations, rental car, busing services, you name it, anything that's requiring fuel, lubes, or chemical deliveries. That's where we play heavily and are one of the major players in the space.
So are you guys a pure play software company, or do you provide the physical hardware, the actual IoT sensors and things of that nature? How is the company, the product that you sell, how is it actually structured?
It's interesting. It's a hybrid, and almost just by default it has to be, because you have to be able to build the hardware to become that data collection device, and then you also have to have the back-end software to take that information and translate it into something meaningful for the operation. So we sell both. So it's basically a SaaS model with a hardware component. So either you buy, you roll it into one-time fee, and that includes the hardware, or you do it as I'll buy the hardware, put it out there, and then I'll charge a lower monthly rate for the monthly service to provide all the various bells and whistles.
Yeah, you mentioned being a SaaS, kind of this hybrid between a hardware and a SaaS provider. How does the SaaS model work for you guys? Are you charging, is it just a flat rate per location? I'm sure there's a lot of variables that go into this depending on the application and the client, but how does that actually work?
Great question. I mean, I think it's really it depends on what material you're managing. So some of these chemicals are super caustic, highly corrosive. I brought up methanol. Methanol season just ended, and that coincides with the Texas Arctic freeze, actually, and winterization. It kind of falls into that, but very difficult to create a solution. We were able to do that, and but that's a higher cost solution just because of the types of materials, your chemical compounds you're trying to measure and maintain the integrity of the sensor, because it's again, it's corrosive and the uplink can get completely eaten out. So it's challenging. So it depends on what you're putting in. Lubes and fuels are oftentimes a little lower cost, but the higher kind of caustic chemicals and acids, those are more expensive. Also, the types of reporting and messaging and services you need on top of it. So if it's highly sophisticated, then there's some layered on expenses. But it really depends on the application. I'd say in general, it's that hardware in that $200 to $400 range on the lubes and fuels, and then goes up from there on the chemical side, and then a monthly fee of around $8 to $10.
So how was the last couple of weeks with you guys, with everything going down in Texas, with the polar vortex and with ERCOT, just being a real mess? I imagine having good inventory management and an idea of tank levels across fuels and chemicals and things of that nature was critical. I'm sure a lot of people were utilizing the SkyBitz platform for that. Was there anything interesting from y'all's side that happened during that time?
Well, I mean, we've definitely got, so one of our good customers, iTank Data, actually works with Halliburton, and they passed along that, there's definitely a high demand for methanol right now because that's the winterization. And I think that played a part in some of the issues that unfolded in Texas, because there probably weren't, that combined with some other things, but not enough methanol, and certainly not enough methanol being managed. So it does play into our wheelhouse, and what we do to support those companies that are trying to make sure that natural gas is flowing. And I don't know the whole story, but it's interesting to get some feedback from them and hear that, yeah, it's tough to get methanol right now. And I think everybody's thinking, wow, this Arctic freeze could happen again, and we got to be prepared this time. And I think there's a heavier reliance, or maybe even support, for natural gas after that, because well, I mean, nobody wants to go without heat, and I frankly I did for 2 days, and it wasn't fun. So
yeah, I think that it's really important. Yeah, it's really important. We at Digital Wildcatters are huge advocates for new technology and for renewable energy and things of that nature, but we have to do it in a way that is responsible for society, right? We can't just divest out of oil and gas, and it would be catastrophic. And we saw that in Texas. You dealt with it. I was without power in my house for 2 days in freezing conditions. And so, we owe a lot to natural gas, and we have to be able to really be able to manage the flow and inventory of methanol and everything that goes in with that. And like you said, I think a lot of people, it's on top of mind now because we kind of have those NAM flashbacks, right, of it happening a couple of weeks ago. And, maybe a once in a lifetime event, who knows, but it does get cold in, most parts of Texas, Northeast Texas, up in the Panhandle, West Texas, it gets cold. So we do need to be prepared for those things. Let's talk a little bit about, the whole premise of Evolve is that the industry needs to evolve. And a couple years ago, I put out a video and I told oil and gas companies that they needed to evolve or they were going to die. And that was really thinking, from an upstream perspective. And I think that you kind of touched on this a little bit, talking about gaining efficiencies. And this is something that we've been hammering on in the upstream space. And a lot of people are looking at how they can utilize new technology to scale and operate their assets without necessarily scaling their G&A simultaneously. What does it look like, downstream? Are companies willing to look at new technologies? Are they looking for these new solutions to do the same? Because I imagine that it's a low margin business as well. Kind of give us some background on that.
Yeah, I think, maybe just touching on, I know the elephant in the room, and it's been probably over talked about, but I think the COVID, this COVID over the last 12 months has been really interesting and challenging on so many levels. But we saw a screech to the, services industry, and everything just sort of went quiet, and oil prices dropped, gas prices dropped. You had, OPEC Russia situation. It was almost a triple whammy there with everything going on and overproduction. And then, we've been on this course, and through that, I mean, there's been a lot of layoffs. There's been a lot of field workers that are no longer employed. And all of a sudden now we've got an economy that's about to reopen. And how do you do that? How do you right size this and do it in a pretty rapid way that coincides with the levels of demand that are about to come? And I think it's going to be challenging. And I think that is where, and that's where I'm tying this around to your question, is that I think you're looking at automation, and you're going to need to have, and we're seeing it. We think it's pretty rapidly coming, and more so just based on this example that I gave you. Is in order to prepare, a lot of these companies are going heavily towards automation, especially out in the field where they don't have access, they don't have equipment, they don't have technicians to go out and do all these jobs. So they have to be able to track all this inventory remotely and make decisions and be as optimal as possible. And it's a tall order. I mean, I think it's going to be a tall order, but it's good for us. It's great for SkyBitz and other companies that are in the IoT space, because I think that is now going to be part of the augmentation process to get a lot of these producers and suppliers back up and running to be able to support us.
Yeah, you talk about that demand that's about to come online, and this is something that we talk about quite often on Twitter over the last several months is that when life returns, we'll say quote unquote normal post-COVID, there's going to be massive demand, and meeting that demand is going to be a massive challenge in itself. I'm glad I'm not in logistics and supply chain because I don't want to deal with that. And so I'm sure that technology like SkyBitz is really crucial for those types of operations. And kind of back to your point, where if you can put in logic and governance that is ran by computers at these remote locations, that can be a scalable way to really maintain inventory and meet that demand without, really having anything fall through the cracks.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, you can really make it pretty bulletproof, and the technology's gotten so good now that you can really do a lot of cool things, and there's a lot more on the dispatching side and doing the things that we're a little more manual even on that. And I think as we keep going, we're just going to continue to grow into more value added systems. So you take that raw data and you're able to then, continue to kind of crunch it and make more decisions and help you with that support process. But yeah, it's definitely challenging. And in the days of driving a truck 300, 400, 500 miles out with a technician sticking tanks manually, I mean, that doesn't scale anymore, and companies aren't going to be able to afford to do that because they've got to watch their GA, and they got to watch their expenses, and they got to be lean and mean and look to profitability.
Yeah, and how does the downstream space look compared to upstream? Like, I'll give you an example for upstream. You have all these tank batteries where your oil is stored, and still a very manual process. I mean, there are a lot of companies that are utilizing IoT to get real-time data on it, but you still do have a very manual aspect where you have a pumper that drives out there and he's gauging his tanks and things of that nature. But we have actually a session coming up here in a bit in Evolve that's really talking about how operators can utilize IoT and things of this nature to get real-time LOE costs, lease operating expense costs, and get information that's happening on their lease. In the downstream space, are the majority of companies already utilizing IoT? Because I mean, it seems to be a perfect use case for it. Or do you still have a lot of stragglers behind that haven't adopted it yet?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I feel like certainly the more advanced customers, the leading edge are pretty. I'd say we're definitely not fully adopted. We're just past kind of early adoption phase, I would say. Where it's becoming, no longer a nice to have, but a need to have. The ROI has been justified. When you think of each delivery costs anywhere from $50 to $100, and you just add to that every time you make an unnecessary delivery, or you have the wrong inventory levels, or somebody doesn't write the right amount down. I mean, that just cascades the cost. So you said it, evolve or die. I think this is an example of that. You have to pretty much, start to embrace this types of technology to survive and run, a lean and mean organization to be able to get out there and capitalize. Because otherwise, you're going to be an acquisition target, or you'll go BK. So
yeah. I think about when I started in the oil and gas industry about 10 or 11 years ago, just going out there and seeing some of the manual processes, just like, for example, talking about measuring tanks, I was responsible for measuring frac pits of water out on location. I was the motorman on a rig, and so I would get in the tractor and the forklift, and I would drive over there, and I'd be like, it looks about 10 feet high, and I'd write it in my tally book and then have to come back and report it to the company man. So, it's cool being fast forward a decade and seeing these technologies actually exist and replace those systems. So real quick, before we wrap up and end here, Anton, where can people find more information about SkyBitz, and where can they find you personally?
So easy, just skybitz.com and our website. And my email is, I can just give you the email or on the site.
Yeah, we actually got a landing page. We got a landing page for SkyBitz, so people can reach out and get your contact information. So hey, man, I appreciate you coming on the show today. This is really interesting stuff. We're right down the road from you in Houston, so we'll have to get you guys on the podcast sometime and meet face to face.
We love it. Hey, thanks.
All right, have a good one.